All right. Good afternoon. It is Sunday, and I figured I'd drop in here. I couldn't get in earlier. I had some clients this morning, but wanted to do a little bit of an update. I've had a lot of folks who've been calling me with all these reports that are going on right now about a potential Pacific Rim massive earthquake and also tsunami. And I've actually got some clients in the Pacific Rim, and they have been the ones that are precipitating this. And of course, other astrologers are talking about this. There's rumors that Gene Dixon and other, psychics had predicted this in the past, right at about this time. And so what I did was I looked, and I looked at a lot of the different things going on with Japan and so on and so forth. But again, I always find when astrologers do that, it's a guess because, these aspects that happen to a country may or may not happen. One of the most powerful things I have found to be useful is interrogation astrology. Now, in India, they also call that Prashna. It's one of the oldest types of astrology, where you just simply ask a question, you cast a chart for the moment, and whatever you're asking about, will it come to fruition or what is associated with, is really an interesting way of looking at astrology. And it's one of the most mysterious types of astrology, because if you think about that, it's absolutely amazing that you can pose a question and cast a chart for the moment. And whatever the houses are surrounding the chart, the eastern horizon is you, the querent, or whoever's asking the question. So I had a gentleman in Thailand, he was quite worried because actually there was a big earthquake, if you remember, a few months back in Thailand. He was in Thailand at the time. He's a businessman. He flies back and forth. And it didn't affect him when the earthquake happened, but it was, I think, in the next country over, Laos or something like that. So I cast a chart and I said, okay, is, Japan going to have this massive earthquake underground? And, the people are predicting the potential of Hawaii getting wiped out and everything else. And I have to say, and I hope I'm right about this, that the chart said no. Now, it doesn't mean they won't have earthquakes. I think the Pacific Rim is constantly having earthquakes. If you look at the United States earthquake USGS map or whatever it's called, I mean, we're always having tremors and earthquakes, even all over the world. So I do think there will be some activity there, but I'm not getting a catastrophic event that's going to be like the earthquake we saw in 2004, which killed over 250,000 people. Remember that? It was huge, that huge, tsunami that came in and just wiped out so many people. And, there's nowhere to go. And then again, you look at Fukushima, look at what happened there. I mean, it's just unbelievable. My last podcast, I had mentioned I get weather. Weather's really kooky right now. And, all these poor people in Texas, I mean, the death tolls, last I looked on the news, it was 70 and it's still climbing. And, this river went from, flood, stage to like almost 27 feet above flood stage. So, I mean, it's incredible. Houses floating down the river, people lost everywhere, children lost in camps. So, that's some serious stuff when that happens. And I get this is a screwy time right now with the weather. And I've also had a lot of people say, weather wars, right? And there is a possibility that that's going on. I really didn't look into that because nobody really asked me. And I figured, well, whether it's weather wars or whether it's natural, it certainly looks like we're going to see some very violent and disruptive weather. That's for sure. So we'll see what happens. And, there's not much you can do about weather. I remember I was roofing on a house with a construction crew back in the 70s. And we looked up and it went from a bright, sunny, beautiful day to in seconds, I watched trees just getting laid down up in the woods. We had to use a chainsaw to get home. And, weather is violent and weather is powerful. And there's not much you're going to do up against Mother Nature. Earthquakes, tornadoes, weathers, floods, they're pretty serious. I had someone recently asked me, what do you think of AI? AI is going to rule everything. AI is going to do. And I said, when AI starts making babies, when it starts rotating planets, when it starts creating life, and when AI can control the weather and all the natural things of creation, then I might say, okay, AI, but it's never going to do that. So anyways, the only thing it could do is destroy us if it gets control of the systems that humans run. but it'll never destroy creation. Not a chance. It'll be the other way around. I trust me. So anyways, let's just see what happens here. We have a lot of powerful energies lining up. We just had Neptune station and go retrograde, and we're about ready to have Saturn do the same thing. That's coming right up here on next Saturday, which is going to be the 12th. And, it's interesting. There is, and I can see why these psychics and astrologers are citing this, because there is a fixed star called Shiat, it's somewhat close. It's not real close. It's not a conjunction. It's within about a degree, and it's a close association, but not exact. And that always has to do with drowning and all these kinds of things, and water related issues. And Neptune is often associated with water. And of course, Neptune and Saturn will come real close together. It won't exactly conjunct. It will be within 12 minutes of arc. And then, of course, the retrogradation of Saturn slides away. So it's going to be interesting to see where this all goes. Saturn and Neptune is an interesting thing because they seem to come together. That's called a fancy word called a synodic cycle. And these outer planets are very, very powerful. And I have to say, if you want to look at mundane astrology, when events happen in the world, earthquakes, wars, all this stuff, big changes in society, no question, the outer planets intermixing with Saturn really do seem to have an effect. Saturn and Neptune come together approximately, not exactly, but about every 36 years. So this is not, something that has not happened before. And Saturn and Neptune is always kind of a reality dissolving. It's a little bit funky, there's no doubt. And I feel a little bit funky right now. I don't know if anybody else picks it up, but Saturn and Neptune is kind of strange. Neptune, I always liken to the portal between the so-called subconscious mind, conscious mind, or the astral world. I almost think Neptune is a very elusive planet. And, a lot of people say, oh, it's spiritual and all that, which it can be. But I often find it's delusional. Weird stuff happens with it. It skews reality. And when you put it together with Saturn, which is the planet of structure and karma, it does have some weird stuff. So, and of course, we're kind of experiencing that right now. And of course, the big buzzword out there right now in the political scene is what just happened here with, of course, this big bill that passed. They call it the big beautiful bill or whatever, right? So, it's and I've been asked about this. Jeff, what do you think? Is it bad? Is it good? And we're hearing both sides of the fence. Some people are saying, oh, this is wonderful. And other people are saying, oh, no, it's horrible. Everybody's healthcare and this and that and all this, social programs are going to be deleted. And, these people are going to be wandering around, without a doctor, right? They'll live without a doctor, believe me. Anyways, but, interesting stuff. And I have to say, I don't want to get into politics and political opinions. I can only say what I see by casting charts and interrogations, and of course, looking at the astrology and what it says. And again, I'll get hate mail. I'll get people leaving the channel, which is fine. I don't care. But I get we're on the right track. If anybody's ever noticed semis, here's a kind of an interesting analogy. If you've ever seen a semi jackknife, you can't back out of it. There's no way to back out of a jackknife. The only way you can pull out of a jackknife is pull forward. And what's interesting about where the country is right now and the whole westernized world is we kind of went into like an analogy of a jackknife. We got into a situation which was almost completely untenable. They flooded the borders, not only here, but they've done it in Europe. And they've bankrupted, for all practical purposes, the treasuries of most of these Western countries. And worse yet, there's been so much red tape and bureaucracy. And I bring to mind, remember I had talked about before the Cloward Plivin. Let me see if I can get this thing to work. I don't know if my computer here is working. Yeah. My mouse is whacking out here. But I'd mentioned this book. It was put out by two socialists, which was known as the Cloward Plivin thing. There, I finally got it to work. So it's called the Cloward Plivin strategy. And basically what these people did, I used this again from a post. I put this up before. But if you can see right here in the center of the page, the three ways to destroy democracy was overwhelm the government with bureaucracy, red tape, right? Like, taking 30 years to get a mine to get approved, mass unpayable national debt, bankrupt them. And the final thing is unfettered mass immigration. Does this sound familiar? Does that sound in any way like what we've been experiencing? It's been a race to the bottom ever since Reagan in a lot of ways. And it's really been interesting because, I know Clinton says he balanced the budget, but when you look at all the red tape that's been caused, and this is really, I have to say, in my opinion, based on the astrology, a valiant attempt by the New One World Order to bankrupt the Western world. And this is called communism. And it's interesting. Many people might remember a lady called Ayn Rand, or no, well, that was Ayn Rand. I forget who she was, but she was asked one time to define what capitalism is versus the other socialism and communism. And I'll read this to you. I kind of modified it a little bit, but socialism is when you have two chickens and you give one chicken to your neighbor, right? Communism is when you have two chickens and you give both chickens to the government, and once in a while they might give you an egg, right? Okay. Fascism is when you have two chickens and you give all the eggs to the government, and the government sells the eggs, right? So Nazism is when you have two chickens and the government shoots you and takes both your chickens. Anarchy is when you have two chickens and you keep both chickens and you shoot the government agent and steal another chicken, right? Now, capitalism is when you have two chickens, you sell one, and you buy a rooster. I thought that was funny. So, you can see the difference here. It's all about money and doing commerce and trade. Now, is it perfect? No, of course not. The material world is never perfect, but it's better than shooting people, taking people, and, lying to them or whatever else. So, again, I go back to this country. We just had the 4th of July. And of course, everybody was predicting mayhem and the end of the world on that. And nothing happened. I'm sure there was a little unrest here and there. I heard the Marines had to go down and the ice raids and all that. But, we're in a time, I think, of major transition. And to use that analogy that I talked about earlier, where literally a jackknife truck, there's only one way to go forward. You pull out of it. And, it's interesting because I've actually driven trucks with long trailers, and I can tell you get in a jackknife situation, you go forward. That's it. So this is kind of what I see based on the astrology, that literally this bill, I can see why a lot of people are complaining. Yeah, there's a lot of things that may not have been perfect in it, but it's pulling this jackknife screwed up situation that we've been in, which is colossal. You got to remember, the United States just went through a Pluto return. Plain English, we're lucky to be standing. I'm actually surprised the United States didn't sustain something much worse, like a dirty nuke or some kind of massive, infrastructure, attack on the power grid or something else. I really am. I thought it would be worse than it was, even though COVID was devastating, no question. And that, by the way, happened, again, I say this repeatedly, on a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. You could have set your watch to it. It was so accurate. It was creepy. Just like 9/11, I could walk you back through all these hard aspects between Saturn and the outer planets, and they always do something that's very powerful. And what's interesting, 9/11, again, that's the most recent one, right? It happened exactly on a Saturn-Pluto opposition. The banks crashed in 2008 and 9 exactly on a Saturn-Pluto square. And of course, COVID busted out right exactly on the tropical Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Absolutely right on. So anyways, what's interesting here is where we're at now is we're coming out of, I think, a really devastating impact that's been on this country. And another thing I heard is a rumor, people may have heard this, but we're about to hear that there may be irrefutable evidence that the 2020 election was rigged. Now, I won't go into that one because that's my opinion, but I'll just say this is that apparently, there's people talking that this is going to come out. And the thing that they're going to go after next is going to be getting into election integrity, so that we have voting machines and that we also have eliminated and paper ballots and same day, putting it on the elections. So this is really, really powerful stuff that's going to happen. And they say it'll happen on the federal elections, not on the state. So it can be mandated. And I cast a chart. Is it true? It might be. So we got some really interesting stuff here coming. And that's going to be, that's why I say transition was my thumbnail for today. And I really think that's where it's going. So the, a lot of people are talking here about the, socialism and communism thing, because, again, I have to say, folks, when you look at where we're at, the Constitution of this country, and more importantly, the Bill of Rights, and all the things that go on, these are incredible books to read. They really are. In fact, I mentioned this, you can get the Constitution of the United States for like $7 to $10. You can get this little book here, which is a wonderful book. Really, really like these books, and definitely worth the read. And this country may not be perfect, but I'll tell you what, that was a valiant attempt at allowing freedom for any individual of any race, creed, color, whatever. And it's really a wonderful thing, because, when you look at what could happen with fascism, and Nazism, or you could say a new one world order, it could really be hell. And I do worry that 30 years from now, we are going to have another Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And you watch these major outer aspects, they always bring change and calamity oftentimes. And, it was, again, Reagan that said, if freedom ain't free, and you got to constantly fight evil, because this is an attempt to keep the rights of people. And, I want to quote somebody, and I played this many times. I want to play it again because it's really appropriate. And this is Aaron Russo. If anybody's not ever heard of Aaron Russo, he was a producer and a really smart guy. He was in Chicago for many years. In fact, he produced the movie Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and, of course, Dan Aykroyd, which was really funny. Remember the $1 bet, and they could bankrupt somebody and put somebody else in. So Aaron Russo did a film that has magically disappeared called From Freedom to Fascism, where he looked into the income tax laws and all that stuff. And quite interesting if you ever get a hold of it. But what I loved about what he said in an interview was that democracy is not a constitutional republic. And this is the transition I'm seeing, even though a lot of people that you can see, half the media is just poised against Trump. And you can see how programmed this all is. And I'm not here promoting Trump or demoting Trump. What I am looking at is the facts of astrology. And what's interesting is the constitutional republic is a different entity than a democracy. And I'll play this again. This is about a minute long. This is Aaron Russo. Listen to what he says, and just listen to the common sense of this. It's right on.
If you ask 100 people on the street, what kind of government is America supposed to be? 99% of them will tell you a democracy. America is supposed to be a democracy. But that's a lie. That's an illusion. The word democracy is not written into the Constitution at one time. It's not in the Bill of Rights. It's not in the Declaration of Independence. The Founding Fathers hated the idea of a democracy. They thought it was the worst form of government there is. And I agree with them, because in a democracy, 51% of the people control 49% of the people. If you're part of the 49%, you're not free. America was founded as a constitutional republic. And in that constitutional republic that we have, 99% of the people can't take away the rights of 1%. You have your rights because you were born with them. You have God-given human rights that nobody can take away from you. The government, the majority, no matter who they are, I can't take away your rights. And that's what our founding fathers gave us. But the psychological operations that they do to us, they make us believe that we're a democracy and that majority rules. You see? And they want you to believe that. Because then they tell you this poll says this many want this and this many want that and this many want this. And it doesn't have anything to do with anything.
Notice what he said about the polls. Now re-examine all the news that you get crammed down your throat. this poll says this, that poll says this poll says that, and it's always polling that is trying to convince us what to believe, right? See, this gets back into the whole thing that I always talk about with consciousness. We're all living our perception of reality. And again, one of the favorite diagrams I always talk about is the lower conscious mind is literally like the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brakes. Or if you like, the keyboard, mouse, and the screen. It's not us. And this is what I think is just not even with politics in the world, but just in life in general. If we examine our conscious mind and our beliefs, we start realizing it's not even critical thinking. It's called awareness, just conscious awareness. And that is such a healthier way to live, where you even question your own reactions to things. And again, that's stoicism. That's, higher vibration of consciousness, however you want to say it. And it really is something I think that we all need to visit, because when we exit these meat suits and own its bodies, we're going to probably stay in the same state of consciousness if we're not self-aware, is probably a better word. And again, this is the future. I mean, when you look at the encroachment of AI, technologies, and I see so many young people now, they're all, like this. And a lot of them are very conscious. They're very aware. And they're looking for some sense of stability, And again, I know a lot of folks are programmed to hate Trump, but I can tell you what's going on here is bigger than what we realize. It's a restoration back to the constitutional republic. That's what I see. And I got to tell you, the opening of all this resources of this country, which has really been capped off by the bankers since the middle 1800s to the late 1800s, was just opened up. That's very mysterious how that's not being talked about much. Plus, all the manufacturing is coming in here, trillions of dollars. And when we see, this lower taxation, this big, beautiful bill, there's probably elements of it that are not perfect. But just like I said, when the truck is jackknifed, you don't back up. You go forward, if you want to use that analogy. And I think this is what's got to happen right now. And I would make a prediction, and I'll tell you why I'm making this, because I look at the United States chart. It has right now the primary directed Jupiter trining the sun. That's not going to happen again for hundreds of years, so about 120 years. The trines 120-degree aspects. These are known as primary or solar arc directions. And I can tell you, this is right around the corner from perfecting. And what does it mean? I think we're going to see this massive influx of business, and all these tariffs will get settled. I listen to CNN and the rest of them just to see what they're saying. And it's all fear, fear, fear. Oh, it's bad, bad, bad. I think it's the best thing that ever happened. Got to remember, Taft was the president right before Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson is the guy who rubber stamped the Federal Reserve Act. Prior to that was all the tariffs. This could potentially balance this country to where it becomes self-sufficient, pays off its debt in a very short amount of time. 36 trillion is a lot of money. Well, 150 trillion plus trillions pouring in here in manufacturing is a lot more. And that's, again, you don't hit the brakes when you're going into a jackknife. You hit the gas, you push. And this is exactly what we're going to pull out of this from what I see on the astrology. Now, the people can send me the hate mail. Oh, he's promoting Trump. He's doing this. He's doing that. But I can tell you, this will come right back on. I can tell you, my opinion is, if the astrology is right, we are about to see this pull forward. It's just going to take time. Everybody's got to quit freaking out. And isn't that interesting? The last comment that one of the guys had me cast a chart on, will Elon Musk and Trump get together? Oh, no. In fact, now Musk is starting a whole new thing. So pretty wild. So anyways, I'm going to look at some of the comments here. It's, a lot of people are, wow, some good comments here. I got to really focus on which one I want to answer. And I apologize, I can't answer them all. But some people, the people are talking here about how many people are missing in Texas. Is really sad. I mean, that's intense, man. When you get that kind of water and that kind of power, it is intense. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me, the power of nature, man. Wind, water, earthquakes. I mean, there ain't nothing goes up against that. So, it's especially when it's intense. And, God bless these people. What else can you say other than, a lot of folks are, yeah, they say 41 are still missing. Now the toll's up to 80 people. And, only thing you can do is hope and pray they come out of it, and bless their souls if they don't. Anyways, yeah, somebody says here trillions of dollars, the devil's in the details. Yeah, I'll agree with that. Anyways, lots of great comments coming here. I wish I had time to focus on these and answer them all. But yeah, so yeah, a lot of people are saying here, again, the storm. Yeah, and I have to say, yeah, so somebody says the CIA operations is about democracy, and I mean, this is really, it's all a psyops on your mind. And if you go back through history, whether you replace governments with kings and rulers and emperors, the same elements of human nature, good and evil, are always at play. And I have to say, this is really where it's at. And it's highly probable that, even other worlds like this time-space continuum called Earth are probably going to have some element of good and evil. And this is where consciousness always is in the middle. And, we're always going to be dealing with that. It's interesting because they say, I always mention this text, it's called the Sefer Yetzirah. It's a strange word that just simply means where spirit concretizes into matter. That's where astrology of all different types begins, not just of this planet, but they claim of many. And this is where the material worlds, where literally spirit concretizes from stardust, if you will, or whatever matter is, into a genetic vessel that all different types of life can form into, whether it's alien, human, animal, plant, mineral, etc. And they say everything in the material worlds will be born, it will grow, mature, atrophy, and it will pass out of the physical form and regenerate. This is the serpent of time. This is the infinite loop of time. And what is time? I always mention that time. What is time? Time is just a reference point to something changing from point A to point B. And it's kind of mind-boggling because those increments of time are totally divisible by some mathematical formula. Of course, we have our day, right? Sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight, which the sun isn't doing that. We just perceive it's doing that, right? Whether you're round earth or flat, it's appearing to rise, which it does. On the eastern horizon, it peaks and it sets and it's midnight. And of course, you got the lunations and the seasons. So it's quite profound. What is time? Time is a perception of a reality. It's definitely real. And we all age, and we all atrophy, and we all die. Very interesting when you examine what is time. And there's so much evidence, psychics and, intuitives, so many of the people that I mentioned, like Dr. Carl Wickland and the Magus Astrovolus and so many others who have documented really scientifically that many disincarnate souls lose that reference to time when they exit the body known as death. And so what is time? Time is an experiential sequence of things that is quite interesting because we're all experiencing time and you can never repeat time. We all have things happen to us or have done things. God, I wish I could go back in time. Wish I had a time machine, right? And that's an interesting topic too, because time travel could very well be possible. There's many people that talk about portals, time travel, stargates, all this thing. And that's an interesting element here in the whole subject of reality, which again gets into astral travel, ghosts, all this stuff, deep stuff, way outside of our myopic perception of reality. And it's interesting how astrology ties in with time. It's really, I always say God created time so everything wouldn't happen at once. And it's really the cycles of the celestial bodies within this solar system that astrologers spend a lot of time looking at. And it's kind of mind-boggling how accurate it is. It's so accurate, it's creepy sometimes. But anyhow, somebody's mentioning here that the same thing happened on July 3rd. Out of nowhere, a storm came. Yeah. See, that's this Mars K2 conjunction, which is, this is a weird month because we have Mars and K2 coming together right between the 20th and 21st of July. And look what we got going. We got Mercury going to go retrograde on the 17th. We've got all kinds. We've got Uranus. That's one nobody's mentioning too much. Uranus is going to be sweeping over the fixed star Alcyon. And Alcyon is a very interesting star. Many of the ancient Chaldeans and Egyptians believed that Alcyon at one time was the center that the galaxy rotated around. Now, that's been kind of changed, but Alcyon is a very powerful star, and it's really linked to a lot of strange stuff, blindness, weirdness, and Uranus, it's basically one of the stars in the Pleiades, and Uranus is going through the Pleiades right now. And like I had mentioned, every 84 to 86 years, it goes around the solar system, and it sweeps over the Pleiades. Every time it does, we got trouble. And we do have trouble right now. We have this war still playing out between the nationalists and the globalists. And, a lot of people are happy about what Trump is doing, but don't think they are not mounting resistances here. And I think this is a very interesting time right now, because I think a lot of powerful people that are surrounding this whole effort that's happening in the United States realize their children and their grandchildren ain't going to have no kind of future if this is not stopped. And, there's, a guy who, is interesting. His name is Dr. Michael Yeadon. And he did a podcast, which was pretty good. It was The Final Call or something like that. It's I can play you a brief clip about this, and he's basically saying here, I'll just be brief, I kind of sped it up, but he brings up some really good points, and you might want to check this out on the internet. I'll play just a little bit of it.
Trilateral Commission, honestly, things like climate change and diseases, that pandemic, were decided to be used by people concerned about population, which is no evidence of real concern. They decided at the same time to frighten you with diseases and changes to climate. It's the same group of people at the same time. And after that, there's a diaspora of propaganda. Honestly, people might say you're not qualified, but I'm very qualified to read the scientific literature and to find my peers. So I've found at least 3 or 4 people who've spent longer in atmospheric science and climate than I've spent in pharma R&D. And there is no question that there is no significant change to the climate of the world since pre-industrial times.
See, so he's mentioning, and I've heard this a lot from different scientists. I only play him because he brought up a lot of good points in there. And again, what's happening right now is a lot to do with grand solar minimums, the cycles of the sunspots, et cetera, and also we don't know a lot about as we traverse through the precession of the equinoxes. Now, whether you're a flat earther or not, doesn't matter. We still seem to be doing it, right? So whether this is a holographic model, I personally don't believe that. And I know there's a lot of evidence to refute that, and I don't want to get into that one. But really powerful stuff. And what's interesting about all of this is, what is it being used for? Again, there's this demonic suppression of society and consciousness that is always going on, always. I mean, you look back at what was happening with just some of the recent horrific things like Mao, and you take Stalin and, all these, despotic, of course, Hitler, everybody talks about him, what the crap he did, horrible. And there's always magic associated with this. There's always some demonic elements to it. Like in, I believe it was Stalin said, it's getting too expensive to go shoot these farmers. We'll just starve them out. When you look at some of the modalities that these evil forces use, it's really creepy. It really is. And again, I go back to the Constitution and the freedom and the Bill of Rights. This country is really worth fighting for, much more so. It's like a tent pole in the sewer of demonic energy. And it's something really quite profound. And there seems to be a blessing on this country to keep going forward. Now, whether you hate Trump or like Trump, I don't care. The bottom line is, where we're going here is trying to restore this place. I've heard a lot of folks too, they literally scream. I'm amazed at the political intensity right now. But, they're all saying, Trump is, battering doors and busting up families. Well, it never gets reported. There's apps out there right now. They pay you $1,000 and give you a free plane ride out of this country, and you could turn right around and come back in the next day legally. Now, I have for years had clients, I got to leave the so-and-so country because my visa has, stopped, and I'm giving them elections to fly on, because I do electional astrology for when people travel. And I'm just thinking to myself, this is fascism when you listen to the propaganda that's being promoted. And why are they doing that? Again, flood the borders with mass immigration, bankrupt the country, and create so much red tape nobody can get anything done. I think this is changing. If the astrology is right, this is all changing. So it's going to be fun to see what happens. And again, I'll just say this month is going to be intense, but we'll get through it. It's not the end of the world. And I hope I'm right in that interrogation that we don't see a massive Pacific earthquake happen. Interrogations are usually right. One of the things I saw was the moon was void of course. Now, for anybody listening to astrology, what the heck does that mean, right? Void of course is a strange term that's just used. I mean, the moon's not hitting anything until it leaves the sign, meaning it's not making any geometric aspects. And it was doing so in a fixed sign, both in the sidereal and in the tropical. Plain English, usually nothing happens. If it's in a mutable sign, it can, or if it's in one of Jupiter and the moon signs, it can be delayed. But in a fixed sign, it's not likely to happen. And I also, cast another chart again on this election stuff coming out. And it just might happen. And I think they're going to go after trying to get federal elections, at least, set up so that they can't be manipulated anymore. And I think there's going to be some stuff coming out on China too. I do get that is probably true. So we're going to see what happens. And, all we can do is wait it out. But I'm always amazed at interrogation astrology's accuracy. And again, most people in the ancient world, they didn't have an exact birth time. They didn't even know what day they were born sometimes. I mean, you figure, if you go back 200-300 years, you might not have had a calendar in your house, So, I mean, life was a lot different. And interrogation was the premier tool. And still, I find it is. It's just an amazing tool to look at. And I use it every day and in readings with people to help them as best I can. I'm not here to tell anybody what to do, but I certainly will tell them what the chart says, and they can take that information and do what they want from it. And the only time I've ever seen it wrong is if I read it wrong. And I do try to, be as accurate as I can. I'm always studying, and it's pretty interesting. So someone's saying here, the fact when you pay attention to the mainstream media is promoting, you are only seeing propaganda and rarely anything real importance. Yeah. And they do report real news, but yeah, it's a lot of it telling you what to believe. It's a big club they beat you over the head with every day, telling you what to believe. And these polls are always skewed. I always hear about these polls, right? Well, nobody ever calls me. Do you ever get called on a poll? Maybe you did, but I never do. I've never gotten called on a poll. Hey, what's your opinion of this or that or whatever? And, it's pretty interesting that is, again, a propaganda machine telling you what to believe. And again, I think since Johnny Carson, I'll give Jay Leno credit. He was good too. But I think since then, we haven't seen really true talk shows. We've seen propaganda shows with comedy used with propaganda inserted. So pretty interesting stuff. And again, that's the way it is. So the best thing I think to do is believe nothing of what you hear, a portion of what you see, and evaluate that carefully. And then you might be okay. So somebody's saying here, seems as everything will be okay until 240. Then we're going to start to head back to the Phoenix phenomenon. Yeah. Well, we also have, it's interesting because the Saturn-Pluto conjunctions actually happen between 33 and 38 years. See, Pluto's a weird planet. It's elliptical in its orbit, and you got the speeds of these planets. And Saturn-Pluto squares, oppositions, and conjunctions are really powerful. I mean, throughout history, I've seen they're really powerful, whether they discovered Pluto or not. It sure shows up when you track it back. And what's interesting here is the next time this is going to happen is going to be right between the 240s and 250s. So that's when it happens again. But we've got the square coming up in 2028. Now, it doesn't mean it has to be bad. That's just it's about 2.5 years from now. And that will happen, I think, 2 or 3 times. Sometimes they happen once, sometimes they happen more than once because of retrogradations and conjunctions. But we'll look at that in more detail if I'm off on that. But yeah, they're very, very powerful. I see right now, this is a dicey time of adjustment, but overall, this is a powerful time, I think, of turning the ship around, straightening out the jackknife trough, whichever analogies you want to use, to a much more positive place. And yeah, we could see some attempts on terrorist attacks. I get more like cyber stuff is more likely. They're not going to win in an iron war against this country, especially with all the fortification and black ops stuff that we've got. And believe me, the United States military ain't just shooting bullets. They've got directed energy weapons, lasers, particle beams, and space-directed weaponry that is mighty advanced. It could even be used to cause such like weather and earthquake stuff. So I don't think they're going to play with us too much. They'd be stomped out in a big hurry. Not that stuff can't happen, and we certainly can see lone terrorist stuff. But I have to say, once we start approaching into the fall, we'll look more into that. But I want to see this Uranus go past Alcyon, which is going to be right in the middle of this month. That's powerful. You got a lot going on here. You got Saturn, you got Mercury, you've got Neptune, all going retrograde, and you've got that Mars Ketu conjunction here, all coming up between now and about the 20th of this month. And last but not least, doesn't get mentioned much, we are in that Kalasarpa yoga, which means all the inner 7 planets are in between the nodes. And that gets broken right about the 28th. See, Mars will slide out there. And again, Mars is always trouble. So we're not done with, the Earth is always a roller coaster ride, isn't it? But I think, we're going to see a general positive trend coming forward. I just worry about weather. Weather is really violent right now, no matter what's causing it, because I see that was a worry. I said that last podcast, and I didn't even expect this Texas thing, but that's what happened. And, we got some violent stuff here coming up in terms of weather. Part of that also might be exacerbated by the sunspots as well. So, there's no question they're playing with the weather. They're spraying the clouds, they're seeding the clouds, and their chemtrails constantly going. I don't know how they can keep funding this. It's so crazy. That's why you see this whole shadow funding going on, which is quite interesting. There's not just our government. There's a lot of stuff going on down the rabbit hole. And I'm not so sure there isn't some other beings involved with this stuff too, because there's a lot happening here on good old planet Earth. So anyways, yeah, people are mentioning satanic stuff. Yeah. And again, people are mentioning here that Trump is trying to get us out of debt. And I really do believe that that's true. And I can't believe that people are not at least acknowledging this in certain areas of the media, And again, if you hate my channel, don't give me hate mail, just leave, because I'm just trying to correlate the astrology to what I think is happening. I'm not trying to promote any agendas or political things or on and on. But that's my opinion. And I really think, I know you're supposed to hate Orange Man. That's what the news tells you, right? But here's a guy saying he lived in Austin in 1987, and he remembers that flood. People in the trees were fighting for space with a huge nest of fire ants. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing like weather, man. It is powerful. There's no question about it. And, it's you got to be careful out there. And this is a dangerous time right now with these planets conjuncting. Neptune and Saturn are very, very powerful. And it brings a lot of weird energies in, especially that Uranus sweeping over the Pleiades. A very dangerous time. We're going to see what happens. So anyways, a lot of great comments here. And I can only stay here about 45 minutes this trip here. But thanks everybody for joining me. And you go on a trip. Oh, somebody's saying here, when you go on a trip, the trip back seems to be faster than getting home. That's because your brain has already absorbed the information you've been getting into. That's something I do a lot of, and I've done this for years, is when I head out the door, when you grab the luggage or whatever you do, whether you're flying, driving, whatever, taking a journey or a trip, the time you head out the door has an incredible effect. The eastern horizon is the commencement of the journey. The midheaven ruler rules the trip there. The seventh house is your destination. The fourth house is the outcome of the matter. And I've invariably found if you head out the door when the moon is making not good aspects, not too good. And the ancients knew about this a lot because back in the day, you didn't have weather, you didn't have SATCOM, you didn't have, all this stuff that we have now. These people were jumping on ships with sails and hoisting them, and huge. That's how so much cargo got shipped around. And they would pay great attention to astrology in terms of the energies when they set sail. And of course, interrogation was used to say, hey, where's my ship? Is it coming back or what have you? So really interesting stuff. A lot of these old texts are full of this stuff, which I find really fascinating. And, you think, oh, that's just, old astrology. No, you apply it to today. Amazing. My son just came back from Arizona and he had it was interesting. They painted the car and one of his buddies forgot to tighten the lug nuts. He made it all the way to California. And then the wheel came off and I got bound up in there. And thank God he hit the brakes and stopped. And we towed it home the rest of the way, 90 miles away. We had free towing for it. And no accident, no nothing. And I looked at the time he left and it was showing some weird stuff here with Uranus when he took off. But it also showed he'd be safe because of the lunar aspects. So very interesting stuff. And I've also looked at catastrophes. I always mention the Titanic. No matter what your opinions are of the Titanic, you should see the time it set sail. There's no question the captain scuttled that ship for whatever reason, because and it showed it would be extremely famous and extremely disastrous. The fourth house is the outcome. And we know where it ended up, at the bottom of the Atlantic. So really interesting how accurate that was, the astrology, because I have really exact times on that. And, again, we hear about these plane flights and so on and so forth. And you always wonder, why does, certain people survive, certain people don't? And, does everybody's chart, look bad? Well, sometimes the mundane energies might also be connected to the date that plane was made, which is a whole nother subject too. It's kind of like a birth chart for a vessel. And again, it's very hard to get stuff like that. But there is research been done on that. That's quite interesting. So anyways, I'm just looking at the last couple of comments. So a lot of people are talking here about trips and stuff like that. I just watched that last night. Good presentation. Yeah. Anyways, somebody's having conversations here about somebody else they watched, but yeah. How long is Uranus in the Pleiades? Good question. That's going to be going on. Uranus goes back and forth. And, I'll research that more, but it's going to be there for a number of months into next year. So this is a very powerful time of change. And again, it usually connects. Uranus is all about revolution, change, rebellion, going against the status quo or a direction that was in play. I mean, if you look back, World War II was the last time that the Uranus was in the Pleiades. And what was it against? Global takeover and fascism, right? You had Hitler trying to take over the world and the Axis, right? And then if you go back before that, it was the Civil War. Well, what was that all about? Rebelling against taxation and slavery and all this type of stuff. It was really, powerful and it was revolting, and it's usually for very, very good causes. If you go back before that, it was the Revolutionary War. And what was that all about? Freeing from tyranny. So, so it's not that Uranus passing over the Pleiades is necessarily horrible, but it seems to be breaking free from the chains of some type of tyranny, fascism, or encroachment on the human spirit, which is, might be tumultuous, but maybe as good as it happened. That's one thing for sure. The physical world is always in a state of change. The only constant is change when you think about it. Nothing ever stays the same. And we are constantly in a state of evolution, transformation, and change. Even death itself is a transition or transformation. And I think the more we approach that idea, the more consciousness we're going to have when we leave. And that's really cool. So Uranus is there for a while. And I think it's definitely going to be probably the better part of the next 2-3 years. I'll research that though, because I don't want to talk off the top of my head. But yeah, it's about like that, and I'll run it through the chart. It's a good question. I like it a lot. So the next time I come on, which will be next Wednesday, I'll have an answer to that as best as I can. So yeah, a lot of people are saying here, people don't appreciate how much Trump has done. MSM won't tell the truth. No, the propaganda machines are clearly out there. Again, I'm not here to defend anybody, but my take is what's happening with this country and what he's doing. The astrology supports it. It's saving the country. Whether you like him or not, the actions that are being taken are, and nothing's going to be perfect. Of course, you're going to find certain things, factories and all this great pollution and, disruption. Some people's land will be, bought off, what have you. It's like people were screaming. I remember when the freeways were being put in, the interstates, a lot of people were complaining, well, hell, that was my daddy's farm, and the government came in and bought it up. But you look at what the freeways have done, progress is always going to have some, by the wayside problems for certain people. But the one thing that always happens, change never stops. And anyways, yeah. And again, I really think we may have just survived a valiant attempt to destroy not only the United States, but the Western world. And it's still not done yet. It's still not done. One of the things that this Michael, I want to play one more clip of him just before I jump off here. And he had a good podcast. I forget the name of it. You want to find it, just Google Dr. Michael Yeadon. And he brought up a really good point here on not only the climate change and all this stuff. It's a pretty long interview. But what I did like here is he also brought up about the debt. And this is very tricky how they do this. Just listen to this real brief clip here.
Come home to roost. The country now has enormous structural debts. And I think debt repayment it's either the second or the third largest item on the budget already. It's more than we spend on education. Next year, it'll be even more. And, it will become the largest budget item if the country survives long enough. So Blair, we voted him in. Blair has, all the other countries in the West have been guided to do this. So they've all borrowed so much money that they are effectively bankrupt.
So there you go. See what he's saying there. We're effectively bankrupt, and people are shrieking in horror. They go, wait a minute, we're 26 plus trillion in debt, and we are. And what's really creepy is if you listen to his interview, and of course I've said this before, I mentioned a man named David Webb. He wrote a book for free. You can download it. It's called The Great Taking. And Dr. Eden mentions in here that it was actually tried in a New York court. If we defaulted on our debt, we could literally, you think the chair we're all sitting in, we own? We don't. The bankers literally would have the power to take everything. And I don't think they'd be able to pull it off and force it, but they could try. And, if you get into a totalitarian system, it would be really scary. And here's the point that I'm making is that, again, I'm using, a semi-truck being jackknifed as an analogy to what's just happened to us. We were and still are in an untenable situation. There's only one way out, pull forward. And that is manufacturing, open up the finances. And yeah, I do believe there's free energy, but it's all about this right here. It's about money. So right now we've got to get out of this financial a complete disaster that we're in, and also this whole thing with the craziness that has gone on. This will come right back on with the again, immigration, the debt, the red tape, all the stuff that's going on. Is it a perfect world? No, it's never been a perfect world, and it may not ever be 100% perfect, at least right now. And so where we're at right now is pulling out of this incredibly crazy position that we've been put in. And I really have to say, Woodrow Wilson in 1913 might have been the gateway into this fascist kind of financial condition that we've been in. And it's interesting how Biden, whose wife also is being shown to have kind of been running things, or at least she was the front runner looking like she ran things, is very analogous, because they said that Wilson was incapacitated after he signed that in, and his wife was kind of representing things behind the scenes. And this might be the gateway out to where if we can become self-sufficient in this country, we might actually be able to print our own money again, rather than having some mysterious, elusive groups behind the scenes who are very much attached to this new one world order, in my opinion, from what I can see. And the United States could actually print its own treasury notes instead of Federal Reserve notes. So, and this is very interesting because Trump is right now doing this with a lot of different programs, which, yeah, might hurt some people. But again, that's throwing the bad apples off the train as we go down the track. And I really think it's quite possible, if this country becomes massively self-sufficient, like it's more than capable of doing, we could get back to printing our own money, which really would release us from some of the secret fascism that I think has been imposed upon this country for a long, long time. So we'll see what happens. So a lot of people are making comments here, and I've got to run right now because I'm out of time. I've got more appointments to go to. It never stops. But anyways, I'm glad everybody joined me, and you guys have a great rest of your weekend. And I'll see you Wednesday, and we'll get into more of the energies coming up. I've got a full moon, by the way, coming up this Thursday, which will, of course, be the day after next podcast, which is very powerful. It always brings energies to crescendos. And I think we're going to see a lot of transformation and crescendos coming up as we come into fall. So everybody have a great weekend, and I'll see you Wednesday.